Wisdom, meaning, and truth travel in time and space. The magical words of Rumi, the 13th century thinker and mystical poet, have reverberated through the ages and continue to resonate with contemporary readers both in the original Persian language and in English.
The perfume of Rumi's message came through to a large extent. We see this especially in several fields or points of interest, which in fact attracts people to the works of Rumi. First of all, the question of universal love and compassion, love for God, love for God's creation, love for the neighbor, and intense love which makes us go beyond the boundaries of our own egos. Secondly, respect for other religions, which issues directly from this universal conception of love, combined with knowledge that God has spoken to various human collectivities in different languages, and Rumi is one of the greatest expositors of the universality of revelation.
إن الحمد والنعمة لك والملك لا شريك لك لا شريك لك لبيك.
Finally, there is in the message of Rumi the element of beauty. Rumi was the great mystic of beauty. Beauty attracted him directly to God. And this is manifested not only in his poetry, but also in the sama, or the spiritual concert of the Mawlaviya order, so-called whirling dervishes. Also very much directed to the soul of Rumi, who saw in beauty a ladder towards the divine beauty, towards God, who according to a famous saying of the Prophet of Islam, is beautiful and he loves beauty. In any case, Rumi wrote a great deal. He's an ocean, you might say, of mystical poetry, and also of metaphysical doctrine, and I am sure that the interest in him is not simply the fashion of a few days. It is going to last and deepen, and one hopes that more and more authentic translations of the works of Rumi appear in a contemporary language, in a language which should be both very close to the original Persian and also contemporary in such a way that people will be able to appreciate it and understand it.
The 13th century was a vibrant, fascinating, and at the same time an embarrassing period in Islamic history. This period witnessed gory disasters, destruction of cities, and massive depopulation of urban centers. Yet, paradoxically, it was also a period of heightened religious and mystical activity.
The 12th century in particular is significant for the emergence of institutions that we now call in English, for the most part, Sufi orders, tariqah or tariqat, or variations of it, or silsile, and many other terms that we use for the Sufi orders. The 12th century is the time period in which many of these lineages that then actually develop social followings around them take shape. Order which then comes into being after the lifetime of Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, which is known as the Mawlawiya, or Mevleviye is the Turkish pronunciation in present-day Turkey, is one of those orders that actually takes its cue from several important formations in the 12th century. So it is at this stage that we begin to see very important institutions throughout the Western Asia and Near East spreading. The most important of these is in Persian known as the Khanaqah, which becomes in Arabic Khanqah, which also is related to other institutions known by different names, such as Tekye or Tekke in Turkish, Zawiya in Arabic, and Dargah at times later, again, especially in the South Asian context. And these institutions, if you look at the architectural complexes nowadays that go under these institutions, you will find that most of their origins actually are to be traced back, the earliest ones, only to the 12th and 13th centuries and beyond. Rumi's own complex, of course, in Konya, present-day Konya, in the middle of the Anatolian plateau, which is present-day Turkey, is one of those that took shape during the lifetime of Maulana Jalaluddin himself in the 13th century, but really fully developed in the 13th century, later 13th century and onwards.
Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, a luminary model of spiritual brilliance and a towering master in the rich tradition of Persian poetry, was born in the ancient city of Balkh in Greater Khorasan in the early years of the 13th century.
من غلام قمرم من غلام قمرم غیر قمر هیچ مگو پیش من جز سخنی پیش من جز سخنی شاد و شکر هیچ مگو من غلام قمرم من غلام قمرم غیر قمر هیچ مگو پیش من جز سخنی پیش من جز سخنی شاد و شکر هیچ مگو.
Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi belonged to a family of established and respected preachers in the city of Balkh and other towns in Greater Khorasan.
The Greater Khorasan was a vast province. Today, the region is divided up among the countries of Iran, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. The cities of Samarkand, Bukhara, Ghazna, Khwarazm, Kabul, Tus, Nishapur, Herat, Marv, and Balkh were thriving stations on the ancient Silk Road.
His father was a locally renowned and venerated preacher with a fervent interest in Sufi teachings. Followers showed their respect by calling him the Lord of the Learned, or Sultan ul-Ulama. From early on, he cultivated a love of learning, spiritual discipline, and oratory skills in his son Jalaluddin. Rumi had thoroughly familiarized himself with his father's book, the Book of Knowledge, a sizable compendium of edifying anecdotes, memorable sayings, and entertaining stories. In the early decades of the 13th century, the Mongols were encroaching on Greater Khorasan and Rumi's native town of Balkh.
The four cities of Balkh, Marv, Herat, and Nishapur especially flourished. But this urban efflorescence had come at the price of excessive military activity in the region. The countryside was heavily taxed, overburdened, and brutally ravaged.
The Lord of the Learned took his family along with him, and a large number of his followers joined in the journey.
Rumi's family actually moved from Balkh to, on their move towards Anatolia just a few years before the Mongols came and took over Balkh. So it was either a very fortuitous move, or actually they were already making plans to escape before the coming of the Mongols.
Rumi's father, the Lord of the Learned, decided to leave Greater Khorasan. Head out and proceed in the direction of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The caravan carrying Rumi's family made stops in Central Asia, Khorasan, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Asia Minor. In Samarkand, the impressionable Rumi witnessed the devastating siege of that city. Legend has it that in the city of Nishapur, the young Rumi had a chance to meet with Fariduddin Attar, a living representative of the Sufi tradition in Greater Khorasan, who prophesied a luminous future for him. The caravan received a welcome reception in Baghdad, the illustrious seat of the Caliphate. In Baghdad, Rumi's father sought the advice of Sohrawardi, another master Sufi leader who maintained good relations with the Caliph and local rulers. Sohrawardi advised the Lord of the Learned to seek refuge in Asia Minor and to find himself in the good graces of the local ruler of that region. Eventually, the Lord of the Learned settled in Asia Minor, or Rum, in the ancient Roman town of Iconium, or Konya.
The reason why they settled in Anatolia like these other Persian scholars and Sufis is because at that time this was a Persian-speaking region with a very similar culture, and a multicultural center like Konya was an attractive place to settle for people originating from Persia. And Rumi's father was a preacher and eventually managed to secure the sponsorship of a seminary in Konya from the local ruler there. And so his life in Konya was based around his father's seminary, and until he himself actually took over the seminary. His father died only a few years after he moved to Konya, and so he had the responsibility on his shoulders for continuing his father's teachings.
Rumi continued his formal studies in Asia Minor and traveled as far as the Levant to take lessons in the madrasas of Aleppo and Damascus. Of particular interest to him were the teachings of Muslim mystics, known as the Sufis, who advocated a more immediate experience of the divine. For some time, Rumi kept busy teaching and discussing Islamic law as well as delivering sermons.
Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi's and his father's lineage actually can be traced back both intellectually but also spiritually to some important people like, for Instance, Ahmed Ghazali, the brother of the famous Muhammad Ghazali, who is a key figure for the formation of especially Persian-speaking Sufi orders, who lived in the early 12th or mid-12th centuries.
The ideas of Ahmad Ghazali we can see, for example, in the same city at the same time, Fakhruddin Iraqi comes and says that I'm going to write my Lama'at bar Sunan Sawaneh in the same way that Ahmad Ghazali wrote his Sawaneh in the tradition of the Sawaneh. So Sawaneh was known at that time in the city.
Not for a life-changing encounter that transformed this provincial man of formal religious learning into a uniquely exuberant soul with a universal and timeless appeal, we would have not known much about Rumi. This moment was defined by Rumi's encountering a wandering mystic in Konya, a man simply known as Shamsuddin Muhammad of Tabriz.
Rumi, before meeting Shams, was an ordinary person, an ordinary alim in the tradition of Islamic education. He knew jurisprudence, he knew theology, some philosophy, and so on. And he was a very good teacher, a very good orator, and a very successful, from the point of view of social publicity. And he had a lot of people who liked him, loved him, around him, and a good number of students. He was a mufti, issuing fatwas, religious edicts, and so on. But at the age of 38, when he met Shams Tabrizi in Konya, where his tomb now lies, he became altogether different. Not only different, but the personality that he got after his meeting, his encounter with Shams, was, I would say, contradictory to his previous personality. It was 180 degrees different from what he used to be.
ای لونیان یک لونی
دیوانه شد دیوانه شد دیوانه شد ای لولیان یک لولی دیوانه شد یک لولی دیوانه شد دیوانه شد ای لولیان ای لولیان ای لولیان ای لولیان ای لولیان یک لولی دیوانه شد دیوانه شد ای لولیان یک لولی دیوانه شد یک لولی دیوانه شد دیوانه شد تشتش فتاد از بام ما تشتش فتاد از بام ما نکسوی مجنون خانه شد نکسوی مجنون خانه شد یک لولی دیوانه شد دیوانه شد
As he explains to us, he says that before meeting Shams, he was all tears, but after meeting, he became all laughter. Before meeting Shams, he was a dead person altogether, but after his meeting, he became, alive, anew. Before that, he was miserable, but through the fortune of love, he became an everlasting fortune. All these are just literal translation of what he has got to tell us about the change that occurred to him after that exceptional encounter with his mentor, his master Shams.
مرده بودم زنده شدم گریه بودم خنده شدم دولت عشق آمد و من دولت پاینده شدم دولت عشق آمد و من دولت پاینده شدم
In the Sufi tradition, Shams and Rumi have become the archetypal master-disciple relationship. And if you go to Shams's shrine today in Konya, you'll see next to his tomb calligraphy saying Shams was to Rumi as Muhammad was to Ali. So the master-disciple relationship is the way it's perceived. But it's a very short discipleship of 2.5 or 3 years. And Rumi already had some Sufi background to his father. So one way of looking at it is that Rumi had the experience of a powerful attraction, became a majzoob, or an especially attracted one through Shams, already having some knowledge and experience through this deep attraction to somebody whom he recognized as being a wali or someone close to God, a friend of God, and who reflected for him the light of God and the beauty and grandeur of God. He became fully absorbed and let go of some of his reticence and hesitations, even at the risk of losing his reputation, to attain and acquire whatever wisdom he could from this person that he'd met.
It was Shams who first guided Rumi in navigating the high seas of love.
Let's for a moment look at Shams, because Shams, for example, doesn't stay in a place for too long. So he's known as Shams Parande, the flying Shams, because he really doesn't want to be pinpointed in a place. And he talks about himself in various, discourses. And in one of them he says, that that beloved wrote 3 kinds of script. One kind he could read and everyone else could read. Another kind the beloved could read but others couldn't. And the third kind neither he could read nor anyone else. And on the surface of it, this is blasphemous. He's saying God cannot read me. But what he really means is that The script is fixed.
And therefore they lived together for about 2 months. And through that very short period of encounter and meeting and education, Rumi emerged and altogether a very different person. He was an ascetic, he was a scholar, but he became a mystic, he became a lover. And the main recommendation that Shams made to him was that he had to empty himself. He had to get rid of what he had already, not to overburden himself with any more knowledge, any more reputation, any more wealth, and so on and so forth. So that was the main recommendation, and actually Rumi accepted all of that and showed and demonstrated to Shams that he was prepared to do all of that. Let me add another point here. When it comes to the relationship between Rumi and Shams, and the main recommendation that Shams made to Rumi, and then it appeared in his book Masnavi, it was not only that love is superior to knowledge and more important than any other human quality, but also, more importantly, what Shams actually demonstrated to Rumi was that he had to will to love. The will to love was more important than love itself. Because sometimes people think that love is something that, incidentally and, comes to you and captures you and overwhelms you, and you are a passive person in front of love. But for Shams, that was not the case, and for Rumi, therefore the idea and the issue of will is very strong and very prominent in all Masnavi, in Divan Shams, in the collection of his odes.
Once Shams showed Rumi the ocean and set him sailing, he vanished, just as inexplicably as he had first appeared in Rumi's life. The fire that Shams had kindled in Rumi's heart lived on and raged feverishly. His passion manifested itself in a prodigious outpouring of poetry. Rumi's poetry brims with references to love and images of the sun and the sea.
Not to think that love means ordinary romance, as it is usually the case among people. For him, love, of course, means human romance as well, but that is only one tiny part of it. The bigger and the loftier part, of course, is different. For him, love is something mystical, theological, ethical, and of course human. So all these layers and levels are there in the meaning of love for Rumi.
چنان مستم چنان مستم من امشب که از شب برون جستم من امشب چنان مستم من امشب که از شب برون جستم من امشب.
The discovery, or perhaps the innovation of Rumi, was that he recommended people to love in order to purify their souls. That is his main innovation, his main invention, if you like. And he is quite conscious about it, and he is very explicit and frank on that. And he contrasts, his way of purification of the soul with the way of other mystics, especially before him. Therefore, I usually use this idea and mention it, that before Rumi we had the mysticism of fear, mysticism of ascetics. But after Rumi we have got the mysticism of love. For him, love is the pivot and the pillar of everything. Through love, you not only reach God and experience Him as a beloved, but also you can purify your soul. He, in the beginning of his magnum opus, i.e. Masnavi, he mentions that whoever becomes involved in love, he will be purified instantly, and he will get rid himself from all vices, and morality and ethicality will be his because of the love.
Love, or the blessed fortune of love, provides the key to the enormous riches of Rumi's thought.
Well, the concept of ishq, or love, is really a very central concept in mysticisms of all kind, and certainly in Sufism, the Islamic version of mysticism.
More than anything else, Rumi is the prophetic poet of love. Love transformed him into who he was, and his poetry centers first and foremost about and around love.
And he's very aware psychologically of what our issues are that love is dealing with and helping. Our hesitations, our fears, our distraction. In the Divan, he has a beautiful verse that explains that. He says, گر اژدهاست بر ره عشق است چون زمرد از برق این زمرد هین دفع اژدها کن. If a dragon is lying on your way, blocking your way, love is the emerald that blinds the dragon. Use that.
He speaks about the trickery of lovers. In other words, when lovers are not sincere, when people do not sincerely love God, they're loving God unconditionally. If their life doesn't go the way they want, if they can't get back to their country, if they lose their job, in general, if they experience things that are unpleasant, they stop loving God. This is conditional love of God. For Rumi, these are tricks. On the other hand, if someone were to be continually in a state of love, continually being grateful to God no matter what happened to them, this would seem to a normal person, even a normal person of Rumi's time, but especially a normal person in our time, this would seem to be insane. Because you should feel miserable if things don't go your way, from a normal perspective. But for Rumi, that's insane. True sanity, in other words, is to be loving God unconditionally. To be in love with God, whether things go their way, as in lutf, whether God is benevolent, or whether things don't go the way they would like, whether God is manifesting qahr, or severity. This is true sanity, but he speaks about it as insanity relative to the way most people relate. And so he tells us, he says, give up your tricks, O lovers. Give up your tricks, O lovers. Go insane. Go insane. Hilat raho kun عاشقا دیوانه شو دیوانه شو و اندر دل آتش درآ پروانه شو پروانه شو
دیوانه شو دیوانه شو من در دل آتش درآ پروانه شو پروانه شو.
Go into the heart of the fire, become like a moth. Become like a moth, the fire of unconditional love of God.
He regarded even death as a divine feast of love. Death is a wedding feast, and the secret of that is that God is one. Sunlight comes in through the windows and gets reflected around the room. Then the windows are closed. Individual grapes become one dark wine. For someone who lives in the light of God, death is nourishment. Don't judge those who are beyond judgment. Don't speak of anything you haven't experienced. There is another light. Try to see by that. In his joyful ecstasy, Rumi sees the entire universe from a tiny leaf shaking in the wind to the majestic celestial spheres as a living organism that is inspired and enchanted by love. Rumi's voluminous poetry presents a kaleidoscopic image of God, humans, the universe, and the interrelationships among them all.
Listen to the neigh as it complains. Az judayi ha shikayat mikunad.
بشنو از نکون حکایت میکند از جدایی ها شکایت میکند ای دل بشنو از چون حکایت میکند از جدایی ها شکایت میکند.
As it tells the tale of separations. He doesn't say as it tells the tale of separation. He says as it tells the tale of separations. What that means is that our human soul, which is, he uses the metaphor of the bamboo flute, the neigh, to express, has been repeatedly and is repeatedly cut from the reed bed of divine unity. In other words, our human soul at each instant, to a certain degree, is separated, is cut from the divine unity. From another perspective, it's never separate.
Rumi's highly nuanced words carry a distinct fragrance and convey a sense of harmony and peace.
The greatest lesson which our contemporary world can and should learn from Rumi is his vast writings which are pertinent to the question of intolerance and tolerance. How Sufism in general and Rumi's poems in particular address the question of tolerance.
In principle, Rumi aimed to guide and not to explain. Rumi never set out to write an organized textbook on Sufism or to give an exhaustive explanation of some or all of its teachings. Nevertheless, Rumi has left a colossal legacy of writings in verse, as well as some in prose form.
His main work is called Masnavi, which is a general name for the couplets in Persian. But nowadays, when we use the word Masnavi, it is like a particular name. It is particularly used for his work and only his work. Now, of course, he has got another book which is called Divan, and that contains all his odes and sonnets, which in volume actually exceeds Masnavi. In Masnavi, you have got about 26,000 verses, whereas in Divan you have got 35,000 verses, altogether about 60,000 lines, which makes him one of the most prolific writers and poets in Persia. When you read him, Masnavi is a didactic work. There he appears as a teacher who is addressing his students and his pupils. Therefore, he is very sober, and in a sense, actually, he is restraining himself from pouring out his emotions. But in Divan, he is a different person altogether. He is a great lunatic, I would say, and he has got no refrain on himself. He is so generous in providing us his emotions that is truly amazing.
In his Masnavi, he's elaborating on the basic cry of anguish of the human soul. He's articulating it in his Masnavi, but he's under no illusion that everybody is going to be able to understand it.
Rumi's other major work is Divan-i-Shams, or Divan-i-Shams Tabrizi, also known as Divan-i-Kabir, or the Great Divan. This work contains some 40,000 verses, and its composition spanned 30 years of Rumi's life, beginning with his meeting of Shams. Other than the Masnavi, the Divan contains all of Rumi's poetry. The overall feeling of the Divan is one of spiritual intoxication and ecstatic love. In addition to the Masnavi and the Divan, 3 collections of Rumi's talks and letters have also been preserved. Very similar in style and content to the Masnavi is a prose work also written during the last few years of Rumi's life. This work comprises notes taken by Rumi's disciples of talks or sermons he gave. Like the Masnavi, it's a didactic work. A second and shorter prose work, known as the 7 Sessions, comprises a number of earlier sermons delivered not to an audience comprised only of Sufis, but to a larger public. Finally, there are Rumi's 145 letters, with an average length of 1 or 2 pages each. Most of these letters were addressed to the local rulers and elites in Konya, and consist of requests on behalf of Rumi's acquaintances and some ordinary folk. A few are addressed to family members and disciples. Rumi enjoyed fame and veneration during his lifetime, in Konya and beyond. Throughout later centuries, his circle of influence widened and extended all the way from the Balkans to present-day Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asia, and India. Rumi is undoubtedly the most well-known Muslim mystic in the English-speaking world.
As a graduate student, we knew Rumi in Persian and through the older translations by Arbery and Nicholson, which were very scholarly affairs, not a lot of fun to read, but useful for helping us understand the Persian when we were students.
One of the best-selling books of poetry in America in the last few years has been a compilation that Coleman Barks did.
Inside water, a water wheel turns, a star circulates with the moon. We live in this night ocean, wondering, what are these lights? Inside water, a water wheel turns. A star circulates with the moon. We live in this night ocean, wondering, what are these lights? This moment, this love comes to rest in me. Many beings in one being, in one wheat grain, 1,000 sheaf stacks. Inside the needle's eye, a turning night of stars. Inside the needle's eye, a turning night of stars. I am so small, I can barely be seen. How can this great love be inside me? Look at your eyes. They're small, but they see enormous things. I am so small I can barely be seen. How can this great love be inside me? Look at your eyes. They're small, but they see enormous things.
Rumi's message has traveled a long road from the ancient city of Balkh in Khorasan, where the sun rises, to San Francisco, where the sun rises from the west.
Be with Rumi long enough. Listen carefully. Let his words enter your heart. And little by little, this relationship with the source of life, which is all mercy, which is guidance, and which is beauty, all at the same time. All of this begins to become real for us. You know, it's profound. It's not only great literature, but it's a literature that's concerned with the ultimate truths of life. Shakespeare showed to us the drama of life and truths of the human personality and its motivations and the comedies and tragedies of life. But Rumi, in a way, lived on so many levels of reality all at once. And he saw the real human journey as a journey of consciousness, a journey through states of being. And the result of this is a greater and greater trust in the unfolding of life, in the goodness of life, in the meaning and beneficence of life. He was drunk with this beauty. He was overwhelmed by something that is not apparent to the senses, nor necessarily known to the rational intellect, but it's what's most real of all. It's what gives life meaning. I'm sorry to sound so mysterious. I'm sorry to sound like I'm speaking mysteries. But finally, that's what Rumi teaches us. He teaches us the mystery that is powerful and beautiful, and what finally brings peace to the human heart. What finally is of greatest value. You know, people are searching for this in so many ways, and most of the time not finding it. He says, for instance, don't go away, come near. Don't be faithless, be faithful. Come to the root of yourself. You are born from a ray of God's majesty and have the blessings of a good star. Why suffer at the hands of things that don't exist? Come, return to the root of yourself. Our master and host, Shams Tabriz, has put the eternal cup before you. Glory be to God. What a rare wine. So come, return to the root of the root of yourself.